Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving deep today, folks. You know the drill. You sent us this really interesting YouTube transcript.
Right.
Yeah, it's Dr. Joe Dispenza from the Diary of a CEO, and it's all about like personal change, healing, the power of the mind, all that good stuff. And we're going to break it all down just for you, the learner.
You got it.
So, yeah, we're not going to overwhelm you with all the technical jargon. We're just going to extract those key insights, make it nice and clear, and, see what we can learn from this guy.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Let's unpack this. What jumped out at you first?
Well, the first thing that kind of hit me was Dr. Dispenza's statement on the connection between our emotional states and our physical health.
Oh, yeah, I saw
He
that.
says something like 75 to 90% of people who walk into Western healthcare facilities are actually there because of emotional or psychological stress.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's huge. It highlights, how much our daily feelings impact our bodies, something that we often overlook.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And he goes on to talk about how we can actually become addicted to those stress hormones.
Yeah,
It's like our body gets used to it, and we almost seek out those negative experiences,
that's right.
like tense relationships or high-pressure jobs or situations, just to maintain that, like, familiar, even if it's uncomfortable, kind of baseline.
Yeah,
That's kind of crazy when you think about it.
it is.
Yeah, and then he connects that directly to disease. Like, if you're in that constant emergency mode,
Yeah.
your body's not designed for that.
Exactly. And that's where it really hits home. Because if we are living in that stress state, in that fight or flight mode all the time, our body is not designed for that, and it leads to disease.
Yeah, exactly.
And he even goes on to say that he offers the tools to break these emotional dependencies.
Oh, well.
And their data suggests that they're more effective than drugs.
No kidding.
That's a pretty powerful statement when you think about the potential for healing that lies within us.
Yeah, that's huge. The learner sent this to us, and maybe you're in a place where you're feeling, trapped in a horrible cycle.
Yeah.
Dr. Dispenza says no past experience, no matter how brutal, is too big to prevent change.
That's right.
He talks about people who have undergone these truly massive transformations, and they came from really, really rough backgrounds.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is he also says about 50% of the stories we tell ourselves about our past may not even be accurate.
Oh, wow.
So we might be reliving pain based on memories that aren't even rooted in fact, just kind of, reinforcing those negative loops.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how do we break those loops? He contrasts this with learning and evolving through joy and inspiration.
Right, exactly. Choosing change instead of waiting for a crisis to force us into it.
So how do we do that? How do we actually create lasting change? It's not just about, thinking positive thoughts.
No, not at all. Dr. Dispenza, he places a lot of emphasis on understanding the neuroscience and biology behind change. Oh, interesting. Okay. His aim is to demystify the process and give people tangible tools for measurable improvement.
Got it.
And his initial interest actually stemmed from these transcendental experiences, these moments of insight that suggest there's more to reality than meets the eye.
Right.
So he really wanted to understand what was going on during those moments.
Yeah, okay. And that fueled his research, his personal research.
Exactly. His own journey of recovery from a severe injury, coupled with this research into spontaneous remissions, those seemingly miraculous healings,
Yeah, I've heard about those.
became really important drivers in his work.
Wow.
He delved into neuroplasticity, the brain's amazing ability to rewire itself, and epigenetics, which is how our environment and experiences can actually change the way our genes express themselves.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So his goal was to understand not just that these changes can happen, but how they happen.
That's really cool. And he does a lot of research at his retreats, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. He really emphasizes the extensive research that they do involving neuroscientists, biologists, even quantum physicists.
Wow.
And they measure everything: heart rate variability, brainwave activity, all sorts of physiological markers
That's interesting.
to really understand what's going on during these practices.
Right.
What's really cool is that they collaborate with some major universities. We're talking UC San Diego, Harvard, Stanford,
Wow.
bringing a lot of scientific rigor to their studies.
He even claims they have the largest database in the world on meditation and the mind-body connection.
Yeah, they do. And it just goes to show the depth and the breadth of the research that they're doing.
Yeah. And it probably allows them to refine their techniques and really get a deeper understanding of, what's happening.
Absolutely.
Now, what makes people come to this work? What are they hoping to achieve?
He mentions a variety of motivations, healing from illness, making career changes, finding financial abundance, improving relationships.
Yeah, all that.
even seeking those mystical experiences that we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
But what's interesting is that he's observed a shift. They may come seeking a specific outcome like healing, but they often realize that their core desire is to change themselves at a very fundamental level.
Oh, interesting.
And the healing or the desired outcome becomes a byproduct of that inner transformation.
Right. So it's almost like they find something else along the way.
Exactly.
He even talks about this craving for, like, the next unknown experience, something beyond our three-dimensional world.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
It is. It suggests that we're looking for something more.
Yeah. He also talks about trauma culture, this idea that people define themselves based on their past traumas.
Right.
You know, I am this way because of what happened to me.
Mm.
How helpful is that?
Well, he raises some really interesting questions about its effectiveness. He explains how long-term memories are formed and how they're linked to our emotional responses. Every time we recall a traumatic event and re-experience those emotions, our body recreates the chemistry of that event.
So you're like reliving it every time you think about it.
Exactly. And our body doesn't distinguish between a real present experience and one that we're vividly remembering.
Wow.
So we can get stuck in this loop of constantly reliving the past. Our bodies become conditioned to those emotions, and our very identity gets tied up in those past experiences.
Right, right.
And he cautions against constantly processing the past within the emotions of the past,
Okay.
suggesting that it can actually make the imbalances in the brain worse.
So how do we get beyond that?
He says the key is to move beyond the emotional charge of the past to truly liberate ourselves.
Right. So how do we do that?
Hmm?
It feels like emotions have such a strong hold on us.
Well, he talks about consciously replacing negative emotions like fear, bitterness with elevated ones like gratitude, love, kindness.
Oh, okay.
And they have specific techniques, breathing exercises, redirecting our attention, body work,
Okay.
to help facilitate this shift.
Right, right.
And one of the most interesting things is this concept of heart coherence.
Heart coherence. Can you explain that a little bit?
It's like a rhythmic pattern in our heart activity that's associated with positive emotions.
Okay.
So think of your heart rhythm like a musical beat. When it's coherent, it's smooth and steady, signaling harmony to the brain.
Okay.
And when it's incoherent, it's choppy and erratic.
Oh, I see.
So when we achieve this heart coherence, it sends a signal to the brain that the trauma is over, resetting our baseline.
Oh, interesting.
The memory might remain, but that intense emotional charge can dissipate, becoming wisdom instead of ongoing suffering.
I like that.
Yeah.
So we have these insights. We understand our patterns. We may even know where they come from, but we still struggle to actually change our behavior.
Right.
Why is that?
That's something a lot of people experience.
Right.
Dr. Dispenza uses the example of, say, you recognize a negative parenting pattern in your own behavior, but you still struggle to break it in your own relationships.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So insight alone isn't enough to guarantee behavioral change.
Got it.
We need to cultivate conscious awareness of our unconscious beliefs, habits, behaviors, and emotional states.
It's like shining a light on our automatic responses.
Precisely. He introduces this idea of metacognition, which is essentially observing your own thoughts and feelings as if they were happening to someone else.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you're becoming aware of your own ingrained patterns.
Right.
And that's the key to unlocking freedom from them.
Wow.
And it's an ongoing process of becoming more aware of our unconscious programming and choosing to reinvent a new version of ourselves.
So it sounds like meditation plays a huge role in that.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about the default mode network in the brain, that kind of constant inner chatter that often comes up during meditation.
Yeah, the monkey mind.
Exactly, predicting the future based on our past experiences.
Right.
He says a busy mind during meditation isn't a failure, it's normal.
Okay.
The progress is in noticing it and gently guiding our attention back to the present moment.
So it's a continual practice of bringing yourself back.
Exactly.
Back to now.
And he defines the present moment as a state of being comfortable with the unknown.
Right.
Which is kind of counter to our survival programming, which is all about predicting based on what we already know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the techniques they teach are designed to help us lower that emotional agitation and settle the body into the present moment.
Interesting.
And consistent practice can lead to synchronized brain waves, a regulated nervous system, a relaxed heart, but an awake brain,
Oh, wow.
which is where creativity can flourish.
He also defines change in a really specific way.
Yeah, he does. He defines it as becoming greater than our environment, our body's reactions, even time itself.
Oh, wow.
He points out that our bodies develop these automatic habits that can take over even during meditation
Right.
and override our intentions.
So how do we work with that?
We have to train the body to align with a new mind by bringing it back to the present moment again and again. And he uses this phrase, nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, no time.
Yeah, what does that mean?
It's entering a realm of pure consciousness, the eternal present moment, transcending the limitations of our identity and our attachment to space and time.
That's really deep.
It is.
So as we become more aware of these habits, what's the next step?
Well, Dr. Dispenza suggests that awareness often sparks a desire to change.
Okay.
He points out that we tend to wait for crises to initiate change.
Yeah.
And he advocates for being more proactive, choosing to evolve even when we're in a good place.
Interesting.
He says we need to recognize those negative patterns,
Right.
like blaming or complaining, and make a conscious decision to change our personality and create a new reality.
So taking radical responsibility for our inner world.
Exactly. And even choosing not to change is a choice,
Right.
often driven by the comfort of familiarity.
Yeah.
He acknowledges the discomfort of moving from the known to the unknown.
Right.
It can feel like a biological death of the old self. So having the tools to navigate this transition is essential.
And mental rehearsal comes in here, doesn't it?
Yes, it's a very important part.
Okay.
He talks about mentally rehearsing desired behaviors and emotions during meditation
Okay.
to teach the body how to feel before the experience actually happens.
Oh, wow.
Like feeling abundance to attract wealth or embodying empowerment for success.
Interesting.
And when we genuinely feel like the future has already happened, synchronicities and opportunities often start appearing.
Oh, that's cool. He also shares stories about these amazing transformations that he's seen, right?
Yes, he talks about the numerous testimonials from people who attend his events.
Okay.
He mentions his work with groups that have experienced severe trauma,
Yeah.
Navy SEALs, special ops, prisoners.
Wow.
And he tells this really powerful story about Joshua, an Army veteran who was struggling with addiction and PTSD
Right.
and experienced a profound opening of his heart and reclaimed his life.
That's amazing.
It is. And he says with veterans, it helps to appeal to their discipline. Okay, yeah.
Explaining the biological mechanisms, like how these practices can reset their responses to trauma, really resonates with them.
Got it.
And then they can apply that discipline to these heart-opening techniques.
Interesting.
And he emphasizes that these transformations are about the brain and body no longer being connected to the trauma.
Wow.
He even mentions these rapid healings.
Oh, wow.
Multiple people with the same condition going into remission within the same retreat.
No kidding.
And witnessing these examples of truth can really change your awareness of what's possible and increase belief in yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's go back to this idea of identity.
Sure.
You know, you mentioned earlier that it can sometimes limit us. How does he address that?
He describes our identity as almost like a character that we play in our lives.
Okay.
And it's important to be able to lay down that character, especially during times of creation and connection.
Interesting.
He says clinging to certain aspects of our identity can actually hinder our progress.
Right. You know, like recurring health issues that might be linked to an unchanging self-perception.
Oh, wow.
So we need to question those limiting stories about who we are and make a decision with real intention to change those beliefs.
It's a conscious choice.
Yes. And the stronger the emotional intensity behind that choice, the stronger the memory of that decision will be, and the more likely we ought to change.
Okay. So what fuels that strong intention? What makes us truly commit to making these often difficult changes?
Dr. Dispenza says we need a clear and powerful why, a deep personal motivation that goes beyond superficial desires.
Right.
He calls it assigning meaning, which involves holding the vision of the desired outcome in our minds,
Okay.
whether it's health, wealth, love.
Right.
He says the only barrier to achieving these things is the part of ourself that needs to change.
Interesting.
And we can use the power of our imagination and emotions to initiate change.
Oh, okay.
Imagining and feeling the future as if it's already happened.
Right, right.
And also becoming aware of and redirecting those thoughts that undermine our intentions.
The negative self-talk.
Exactly. He says that overcoming these old patterns leads to becoming a new self and greater self-love.
I like that. Forgiveness is another key piece that he talks about.
Yeah.
We often think of it as something we do for someone else, but he offers a different perspective.
He defines forgiveness as overcoming the negative emotions associated with a past hurt. When we release that emotional grip, our heart opens, and we release beneficial chemicals like oxytocin.
Oh, wow.
And higher levels of oxytocin make it hard to hold on to those grudges.
Interesting.
So it's more about liberating ourselves from that negative emotion.
Right.
He emphasizes that forgiveness shifts our attention away from the person or the problem,
Okay.
and we reclaim our energy.
Right.
True forgiveness isn't forced, it's a byproduct of a change in our emotional state.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
He also talks about stress, right?
Mhm.
Chronic stress.
Yes, he does. He connects the rising levels of stress in society to our unresolved baggage from the past.
Okay.
He says stress is basically being knocked out of homeostasis,
Right.
leading to heightened beta brainwaves and an overfocus on the external world, our body, and time.
Yeah.
And this constant activation of the stress response weakens us and can lead to disease.
Right. It wears you down.
Exactly. And he brings back that idea of addiction to stress hormones,
Okay.
explaining how it can drive us to seek out stressful situations.
Oh, wow.
He emphasizes that our emotional responses are key, and we can learn to regulate and shorten our reactions.
So we have control.
Yes, we do. And emotional balance is crucial for overall well-being,
Okay.
just as important as physical and chemical balance.
Got it.
And it's like we need to become aware of whether we've become comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
He talks about that haha moment of recognizing a potential addiction to negative emotions
Right.
and even experiencing withdrawal when we try to change. And he says living in stress makes it hard to change because it triggers fight or flight, not a state for creation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
He notes that for many people who heal, the initial focus is on regulating their emotional states.
Okay.
He shares his own experience of how prolonged negative emotions can impact the immune system.
Oh, wow.
And he mentions a study where stopping survival emotions for 3 days and practicing elevated emotions increased IgA levels, a key immune marker, by 50%.
No kidding.
So elevated emotions actually signal to the body that it's in a nurturing environment,
Oh, that's really interesting.
leading to better internal defense.
No, he also talks about routine, right?
Yes, but he frames it as setting aside self-time.
Oh, self-care time.
Exactly. He shares his own morning routine, which is about 2 hours of mental and physical preparation and meditation.
Wow, that's a commitment.
It is, but he says the timing isn't as important as the consistency.
Okay.
The purpose is to reflect on your desired and undesired states, to plan for change, to embrace the unknown. And he says the level of engagement in his community is really high, which he attributes to the positive benefits people experience.
Yeah, people are seeing results. Now let's talk about this brain-heart coherence thing.
Sure.
What's the connection between our brain and our heart?
He explains that there's a very real connection and communication pathway between them.
Okay.
And coherence in this context refers to rhythm in our brain waves.
Oh, I see.
So when the waves are orderly and rhythmic, that's coherence.
Okay.
And when they're all over the place, that's incoherence.
Got it.
And he says broadening our awareness to sense space can slow down our brainwaves from beta to alpha,
Okay.
which is the creative state.
Interesting.
We do less analysis and thinking.
Right.
He distinguishes between low beta, which is normal awareness, mid-range beta, which is increased alertness, and high beta, which is stress and fear.
Oh, okay.
And coherent alpha opens the door between the conscious and subconscious minds.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Then we have theta, which is the hypnotic state, where the subconscious is highly suggestible and can be reprogrammed.
Okay.
He does caution against delta, which is unconsciousness.
Right.
He outlines how we naturally progress through these states during sleep and waking.
Okay.
And when we're in theta, with our attention and energy in the heart prompts the brain to be creative.
Oh, wow.
And theta becomes a carrier wave for alpha, beta, high beta, and ultimately gamma,
Gamma.
which is super consciousness.
Oh, wow.
It's brain resonance.
That's amazing.
And they've seen incredibly high gamma activity in experienced meditators.
Now, what about psychedelics? Do they induce similar states?
That's a great question. And he says they're planning a study to compare them.
Oh, wow.
But he does mention that fMRI studies on psilocybin show a shutdown of the default mode network,
Okay.
which is what they see in advanced meditators during mystical experiences.
So it's similar.
It seems to be.
So is being in theta necessary for reprogramming?
Well, he says that when we have a conscious intention in the subconscious mind, which is easier in theta,
Okay.
it signals the autonomic nervous system to produce chemicals that align with that intention.
Interesting.
So theta is often used to program mystical experiences because of that suggestibility.
Right.
But he also talks about a third way,
Oh, okay.
connecting to this invisible field of energy, the quantum field, beyond our senses.
Okay.
This is done by broadening our awareness in a certain range of theta.
Right.
And this connection to energy and frequency can trigger very high gamma states,
Wow.
characterized by ecstasy and bliss.
That's incredible.
He calls it dipping closer to source and a biological upgrade.
That's pretty wild.
And the research is fascinating. Blood from advanced meditators in these moments could stop the COVID virus from entering cells
Really?
and inhibit cancer cell function.
Wow.
They saw changes in mitochondrial and glycolytic function in cancer cells, neurogenesis markers, a completely different microbiome after 7-day retreats,
Wow, that's amazing.
and no dietary changes.
Okay.
He also mentions the Wim Hof study on virus resistance through breathwork and meditation.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that.
And their findings are supported by published research.
So there's actual science behind it.
Yes, there is. And the key is that being greater than our environment strengthens our body's innate intelligence.
That's really powerful.
Yep.
So let's talk about this quantum field.
Okay.
It can sound a bit abstract. How does he explain it?
He describes it as this immaterial realm of energy and information beyond our senses.
Okay.
He says our perception is limited to the material world because we evolved to survive in the physical realm.
Right.
He quotes Einstein, EMCR, energy governs matter.
Okay.
So he asks, can changing information in the quantum field change our reality?
Oh, wow. The holographic universe idea.
Exactly. And to connect to this field, we shift our attention away from the body, environment, and linear time.
Okay.
We become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, no time. Pure consciousness.
Right.
Thought is the electrical charge in this field, and elevated emotion is the magnetic charge.
Oh, interesting.
So with a coherent brain and heart, thought plus feeling, we broadcast a new Wi-Fi signal.
I like that.
And changing the information in this field can change our destiny.
Wow.
Creation from this field, feeling the outcome as already happened, draws things to us.
Okay.
We don't have to chase them.
That's really different from how we usually think about creating things.
It is. It's not creating from lack.
Right.
He clarifies that wanting is natural, but creation in this field requires feeling whole, not lacking.
That's deep. Now, this addiction to negative emotions thing,
Yeah.
the powerful analogy.
He uses the example of not being able to just turn off anger or sadness.
Right.
He says that those negative thoughts trigger the stress response, which has long-term negative effects
Okay.
on our genes and our health.
Right.
And if we choose to stay in those states, even knowing it's harmful, it might be an addiction
Oh, wow.
or a comfort in those feelings.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So he encourages self-awareness and effort to shift.
Right. Right.
And he says the only person we're hurting is ourselves.
Yeah.
But when we change our state, it creates a feeling of worth.
That's powerful. Now, he ends with a really big question.
He does. He asks, can our nervous system create chemicals that work better than any drug?
Wow.
And based on their data, he says yes.
Oh, wow.
He says the retreats have a 75 to 100% effect rate
Wow.
compared to drug trials, which are around 25%.
That's incredible.
And these changes happen without external substances or dietary changes.
No kidding.
It's from within.
Wow.
He attributes it to the techniques, the collective synchronization of the group, the oxytocin release.
That makes sense.
They've even seen 80% of participants expressing the same genes and proteins,
Really?
like an emergent consciousness.
That's wild.
And they're studying that further.
Now, given all this, what about his belief in God?
The interviewer asks that, given the mystical aspect of his work. And he says he believes in one God with many expressions.
Okay.
He believes that God lives within every human being, the divine.
Okay.
And we need to make time to connect with that,
Right.
to cultivate love and awareness.
Yeah.
And by removing the veils of emotions and habits, we connect with the unifying field, the source.
That's beautiful.
And the expression of the divine through us is increased consciousness, mindfulness, willfulness, and love.
Wow.
He says we're dimensional beings living a dimensional life.
Okay.
And we need to connect with the universal mind.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, based on what you, the learner, sent us.
Right.
We've explored the power of the mind to influence our biology, the potential to overcome limiting beliefs and emotions, the importance of presence and conscious creation, and the possibilities of connecting to a source within.
It's really incredible stuff.
So, the learner, as you reflect on this, here are some questions for you. What meditation techniques resonate with you? How can you identify and shift those deep-seated emotional habits? What steps can you take to connect with the quantum field?
Yeah, those are great questions to ponder.
And here's a final thought. Given the potential within our nervous system and consciousness, how might our understanding of health and transformation change in the future? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.